All right. We thank you, Mike, for teaching last night. Not last night, last week, maybe last night, perhaps. Um, what I'd like to do tonight, we're going to focus most of our attention then on chapter 27. So Mike covered at least a good portion of 26 last week. So I'd like us to do two things. The first is going to be sort of a preamble. We're going to do a tiny bit of review in 26, and then we're going to spend the balance of our time in 27. First of all, what I'd like to do in chapter 26 is look at a single verse that if you have a red letter, anybody have a red letter Bible here? Okay, you're going to notice that this verse is in red letters, and it's going to be, we're just going to back up a little. We're going to look at several verses in Acts 26, verses 12 through 18. We're going to focus on one particular verse, which is verse 14. But 26, verses 12 through 18. So Paul here is still making his defense before King Agrippa II. And it's interesting when you look at the people that in front of whom Paul has defended his faith in these chapters all in a row. Again, by the time we get to chapter 26, we've moved all the way up the ladder to King Agrippa II. What's interesting is King Agrippa has a sister by the name of Bernice. I always used to read this passage when it says that King Agrippa showed up with Bernice. I thought that was his wife, but that's actually his sister. They, of course, were the children of King Herod Agrippa I, and he had 4 children. He had Agrippa II, he had Bernice, and then he had 2 other daughters, one of whom was named Drusilla. This sister of Agrippa II had actually been married to Felix, Governor Felix. And so Paul is now defending himself in front of a closely knit family. And I never appreciated until I started studying for this, that there was those relationships between the names that we're reading about here. There's a lot of intrigue that go on between these families. But again, when we get to this part of 26, Paul's going to do a couple of things. He's recounting for the second time now his conversion experience. The other time he does it is in chapter 22. And each time he recounts his conversion experience, there's a little extra that we learn, some details that are not in the original account or in even chapter 22. This time we're going to see 2 things happening. We're going to hear specifically a very interesting sentence that Jesus offered to him on the road to Damascus. The second thing we're going to see is the fact that Paul is in his way going to try to open the door to evangelism to King Agrippa, who is Jewish, knows the Torah, even though he probably didn't keep it with any degree of faithfulness, but he's very, very familiar with the teachings that Paul is familiar with. So let's just read these verses very quickly. Actually, is there a volunteer to read verses 12 through 18 of Acts 26? Okay, Mike?
While thus occupied, as I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priests, at midday, O king, along the road I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we all had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice speaking to me and saying in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So I said, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness both of the things which you have seen and of the things which I will yet reveal to you. I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well as the Gentiles to whom I now send you, to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who were sanctified by me in faith.
Okay. Again, the first verse we're going to look at is this verse 14. When Jesus said, "It is hard for you to kick against the goads." Now, what do we know about a goad? What is it in reality?
They're related to the goats.
No, not really. They're different. Yes.
It's a sharp stick. Poking him with a sharp stick.
There you go. That's true. If you were around oxen in those days, or cows as we call them today, you would have this sharp stick. Usually it had an iron point on the end if they were very serious about things. But what would you do with a goad? You got some livestock in front of you. What are you?
Prodding them.
Making them mad.
That's right. Prodding them to get through the chute or whatever else it is, or to get in line. So why did Jesus use this word in talking to his soon-to-be servant Paul? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. Okay. Jesus is a shepherd, but what are the goads that Paul is kicking against? In Revelation, we hear the wonderful word from Jesus, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." And I want you to open that door because I want to have fellowship with you. How had he been knocking on the door of Paul's heart? I'll say Saul's heart. Goading him, moving him toward where he wants him to be. What do we know from the biblical record could have been an example of goading Paul to one day accept Jesus Christ as his Savior?
At this point, he is still a Jewish persecutor of Christians.
Yep.
Is it possible that he was witnessing what they were willing to endure for the name of Christ?
I'm sure even though maybe he didn't admit it, there had to have been a part of him that registered with these people who are so willing to go to death for this person that I still think is a fake and a blasphemer. That had to have been impressive to him. The entire 7th chapter of Acts. How would you characterize the entire 7th chapter of Acts? It has one subject, one theme.
Stephen preaching to the council.
Okay, preaching to the council, but how does he's here knowing that his time is short, right? He knows they're going to be picking up stones, and there's this guy Saul sitting there with his arms crossed, maybe the garments down below him so these people can really toss those stones, and he's maybe nodding his head. How does Stephen decide he's going to defend himself? In the verses of chapter,
from the very beginning all the way through to now, of historically accurate. This is the revelation and the revelation of God's prophecy from beginning to where he's at right now today, and how this Jesus that y'all are persecuting is in fact the one that God promised from the beginning. And all these prophets have testified to that. And now we've answered the question of what are the goats.
That is that's a big spear kind of goad, okay? Paul is hearing perfectly recounted the history of his forefathers, the law that he loved, the God that he was devoted to. And Stephen is doing such a remarkable job of laying this out that it was unmistakable, the linkage all through all these waypoints of God's plan of salvation, perfected in Christ.
You think it's possible Jonah was also kicking against the goads? God had a will for him, but he kept going the other way. And the more he went away from God's will, the harder it got on him, like a goad.
You bet. That and there's lots of examples of people in the Bible that are resisting the goads, and God, he has moved people toward him by life experiences. We appreciate that, and he still does so today. The point is, Paul, we learn in Acts 14, verse 1. Let's turn to Acts 14, verse 1. I don't think so. That's John 14. Okay. At Iconium, Paul and Barnabas went as usual into the Jewish synagogue. And what are they going to be talking about in the Jewish synagogue? They're going to be reciting Stephen's defense in their own words and in their own way. But they're going to lay out. That's right. Well, right. Sometimes rocks were involved. But the point is, this is elegantly ironic, isn't it? That Paul would be using the speech that he no doubt remembered that Stephen offered while he was preparing to say, kill this man. He was using his, shall I say, playbook. So if we put this sort of thing in context, what do you suppose he is doing in talking about the fact that he is being sent? And he's talking to King Agrippa. He is in the process of wanting to evangelize the king. And how do we know that Agrippa figures that out? And he says what?
Do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to accept Christ as the Messiah?
Exactly. Agrippa is completely aware of what Paul is doing. We don't know if Paul has been in his presence before, perhaps. But here he is in his defense, and he is now trying to get a twinkle, to get some kind of a thought planted in King Agrippa's mind. Isn't that wonderful? He's not just saying, I'm innocent. He's saying, and oh, by the way, you need to think about this.
And it's a powerful argument he makes because Agrippa was very learned.
Oh, yes.
And if he had been mistaken in any of it, Agrippa could have challenged him, but without having anything to challenge him on, he just says, you think you can persuade me that easily?
Yep.
But he couldn't argue with it.
That's right. Could not. There's a verse in Ecclesiastes that is interesting and will sort of tie up this little section in a bow before we move to chapter 27. And that is Ecclesiastes 12, verses 11 and 12. So it's the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, verses 11 and 12. Yeah, it's just before he gets to the end of the matter, but it's heading in that direction.
Those goads again.
That's right. But these are words of sort of final entreaty by this very, very wise king. And what does he say in these two verses of Ecclesiastes 12? You shall.
The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails, given by one shepherd. Capital S on that sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter.
There you go. From the NIV, it says, the words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. As we go through our life, we have this wonderful book that we can put on our desk. We have any number of study aids. It's never been easier to study the Bible in depth than it is now. But the interesting thing is when we study God's Word, if we start reading a lot of different books, nothing wrong with reading different books, you understand, that are not Bible. But we have to recognize that there will be things often added to the message of the Bible that steers it in a direction it is not intended by God to go. So the words of Solomon are to pay attention to the word of the God. And does Solomon know of what he speaks? It hadn't been too many years before he wrote these words that he had built altars on the Mount of Olives to the Moabite gods. So his wives, not of the nation of Israel, could worship. That's one of those times when you think, how did you get there? Well, by adding a little bit here, and ignoring a little bit there about God's law, about his word. And so he's saying, look, the way to wisdom is through the wisdom of God, but God alone. That is the wisdom.
It's interesting too in Revelation, he closes it out by those same admonitions. Do not add to the word, do not take away from the word. Which is a good way to close it, because there's a lot in here between Genesis and the maps, but don't be adding to and taking away and taking liberties with it.
Right.
If you do.
Yeah, there's severe punishment for that penalty.
Yeah. And look, I was baptized on this day in 1968. And I've learned an awful lot since I was thinking about that today. Goodness. I wasn't quite 11. And what did I knew enough to know that I was lost. I mean, whenever we were baptized, we all came to that realization, and that God was a solution and his grace through the gift of his son. But if each one of us in this room is blessed with another 20 years of life, if we stay students, dedicated students of God's word, we're going to look back at this date, 20 years then in the past, and go, man, I used to think this, and I've studied this a little more deeply, and now I understand this. Now I understand the depth of what real God-pleasing faith is. Now I know this from experience and that from experience. And so it is a journey. But God is going to gently, lovingly poke us and prod us all through there. Okay? Because we're gonna end up coming up with looking at some familiar passages of Scripture. And because of some situations in our life that we can look back on maybe in the immediate past, we're going to have learned some lessons, some life lessons from these. So it's just an encouragement for us to pay attention to the goading of the Spirit, because it's always for our best. It's not to bring blood, okay? It's to say, my child, that's where I want you to be, right there. You follow my word. So I think it's just wonderful to read, again, how God's goading of Paul, in at least the situation in Acts chapter 7, many other ways as well, completely changed his life and the direction of his life. So I think it's just a wonderful lesson. Any comments before we get into 27? Yes?
Do you think it's a little bit tied to idolatry, when not only just read it and put some words from the book, but reading the Word of God and making idolatry, like we're thinking, well, this sounds better for me. It is better for me that I can feel. Taking God's words behind what I think. Not just necessarily read, but idolatry. Because happened on the Israelites when Eli has the two sons, and then there was the fading, when they lost the ark against the Philistines, and they thought the ark will be the main thing for them to win, and they forgot about what God said.
Right.
And then back on the Samuel, when the prophet when over there by Samuel, when they told him the prophet came and says, when you go to this land, kill everything, don't leave anything alive.
Correct.
He came out with the king and some of the animals.
What's
and then
that?
He asked him what he did.
What's the sound of animals I'm hearing? It's supposed to be dead. Yeah.
That's idolatry to me.
It is the idolatry of our own will. Yes. Yeah.
Thinking that I'm okay, it's going to be okay.
Yes.
And you can justify anything in your own mind, right?
Yes.
Why would I kill the innocent animals? I can use them because God said to. That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. So closing thought there is we just always need to recognize and maybe refresh our memory that our study of God's Word, our life as a Christian, is not subjective. Correct? It's not subject to our thoughts and preferences. It is very, very objective. And the object is the perfect God that wrote it. So anyway, well, thank you very much. Okay. Now,
You brought this up about
okay.
objective perspective.
Okay.
Is God objective?
No, he is completely subjective.
He is.
He's the only one who can be.
Who can accomplish that. And people need to realize that. We need to be objective in our observation, which we are incapable of doing, at least completely.
Yeah.
But he is not. He is totally subjective.
You know, in my annual Bible reading rota, we've finished the middle of Leviticus. Very fascinating book, by the way. If you want to know about yellow hairs and skin lesions, read Leviticus. But the point is, I'm at this point when God is telling them, do this, I am holy, I am God. I am God. I am the Lord. I am the Lord. I am the Lord. Sometimes he says it every other sentence. And did they get it? Nope. Do we get it? Not as much as we should. This idea that he is it. And I love it the way he's talking to these people who had grown up in a very, very polytheistic world. And he says, not only am I the Lord, there is no other. Okay? That raw thing, not a God. It's me. Me. So very, very straight with it. Thank you for that. So, Acts 27. I had wondered how we were going to cover this tonight. And I finally, you're going to have to forgive me. We're going to read the whole chapter, okay? I don't mind reading it, but we'll read the whole chapter 27 because it is a fascinating study of some situations in Paul's life. This is going to be when he has finished his defenses and now he's going to get on a boat and go to Rome. Right? Could you put up our first slide, our only slide? Okay. Love maps. So this map tells us where chapter 27 is going to go. We're going to read a lot of names of places, being on the lee side of an island, all of these little things that to us, with our map knowledge, we're not really very familiar with. But this tells us kind of what's going on, and have this in our heads. It'll be up here while we read. But you'll remember that Paul ended up in Jerusalem at the end of his third missionary tour to deliver the collection that he had taken from congregations all through this area, mainly from Gentiles. In Jerusalem, he gets arrested, and that sets up, ultimately, this big red line that you see right here, because he, through all of this, all of these accusations, he is going to appeal to Caesar, who, by the way, lives up here in Rome.
This is just his travels from his arrest to...
That is just chapter 27. Okay? So, he is going to get moved up to Caesarea. He was sent there by a Roman centurion who was trying to protect him from what was going on in Jerusalem, and he heard of plots of these Jews trying to kill Paul because what he's mentioning, which basically is that the Gentiles can be a part of God's family. So Felix, Festus, and Agrippa all hear his case in Caesarea. Then he's going to get on a ship, and they're going to come up like this, get to Myra. This is a small boat, a ship. He's going to get onto a big ship here. And then they're going to be sailing right through here, down on the lee side of Crete. They're going to come right here. And when you get to about this spot, here's the Isle of Malta, where he's going to end up after the shipwreck. This spot right here is roughly where people have this shipwreck in the process of occurring. That is about 300 miles. 300 miles in a ship that's foundering and is going to end up breaking apart. 300 miles for 2 weeks, more or less. So have that whole thing in your mind as we read this, because there's going to be something happens here that's going to show how God dealt with Paul's fear. Okay? Because he's going to be afraid. God would not say, don't be afraid if you are not afraid. Correct? Okay. All right. I'm going to read this down. First thing I want to do, I just want to, rather than stopping in the middle of this, I just wanted to point out some things in some verses. When they come up, you'll know kind of what's going on. First of all, in the first verse, we read about this centurion named Julius, who was going to be the one protecting Paul during this trip. And he belonged to the imperial regiment, which was, I wouldn't say SEAL Team 6, okay, but it's basically the special forces of the Roman military complex, okay? These were the people that were often sourced as spies. They were people who would be in charge of delivering very, very highly significant provisions to the battlefield. And they were also in charge of delivering safely to their destination high value resources, high value, in this case, prisoners. So Rome is not pussyfooting around with this Paul guy. They are really protecting him. All right. So that's the first thing. Second thing is we get to the end of verse 2 and we hear about Aristarchus. I'm going to take time to do this. Okay. If you got your phone, we're going to do a little Bible study project here. So get your phone, if you don't mind, and go to BibleGateway.com. BibleGateway.com. Or you may have the app. When you get to the search field, type in Aristarchus. Aristarchus. What do you see? Okay. You should probably see single verses listed in that. Just kind of read them out there.
The verse or just
The verse, whatever is there, shows where his name is.
Yeah, I've got Philemon 1:24.
Yeah, are they showing you the
Yeah,
words
I
for?
can click on it.
Yes.
And so do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, and Luke, my fellow workers. It's just a closing.
Okay. So he hangs out with Paul a lot. Just look at the first one then. The first.
Acts 19:29.
Okay, what is that?
So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions.
This is in Ephesus, right?
And then in Acts 24, it says, and Sopater of Berea accompanied him to Asia, also Aristarchus and Secundus of the Thessalonians, and Gaius of Derbe, Timothy, Tychicus, and Trophimus of Asia. In Acts 27:2, it says, so entering the ship at Adramyttium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia, Aristarchus of Macedonia and Thessalonica with us.
Yes.
There you go.
The point is, Aristarchus has been by Paul's side in some very difficult circumstances. This thing at Ephesus, that was real. Paul was in danger of being ripped apart by that crowd. Okay?
Colossians says he was a fellow prisoner of his. They were both prisoners together.
He had been prisoners with Paul. And I believe he also had been very, very ill once at one point. I hope I'm not remembering that incorrectly. But when we read of Aristarchus being with him in this trip, this is a man who's not an apostle, obviously, but he does not shy away from danger when it comes to suffering for the word of Christ. So it's important that Luke states this because this man, again, was a Macedonian. He wasn't a nice, little guy from over here. He was from Macedonia. He'd seen some difficult times with Paul. So let's remember this as we start. So I'm gonna read through this just all at once, okay? When it was decided that we should sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to the centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. From there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. So that's here. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete opposite Salmone. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the fast, which is the Day of Atonement, what we call Yom Kippur today, which occurs in September. So they're getting on to winter, and that's going to be important. So Paul warned them, men, I can see our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since a harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. So spend the months of winter still as a prisoner someplace else. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they thought they had obtained what they had wanted. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called the northeaster, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. When the men had hoisted it aboard, they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. Fearing that they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent beating from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Verse 21, after the men had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God whose I am. Isn't that a wonderful way for him to put it? An angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight the sailors sensed we were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Ha! Okay. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it fall away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. After he had said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then they broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea at the same time, untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and could not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land in safety. Okay.
Where were they worried the prisoners were going to go?
300-mile swim.
I mean, I'm just saying that island doesn't look. Oh, maybe it's bigger than it looks.
Well, you got to remember the Philippian jailer wasn't the only one afraid for his life. If the prisoners under his charge escaped, that's a death sentence. Yeah. I think it's interesting that the centurion that went along with them ended up, I wouldn't say a centurion has a soft spot in his heart for anybody or anything. But what do we know about this centurion, whether it's Julius or this second one, where Paul is concerned?
Special treatment.
They had some kind of respect for him. Didn't mean they believed what he believed, but there was something about Paul, and there was God doing something in their minds and hearts, making them partial to Paul.
And they had all heard Paul make that proclamation right before that. Do not lose heart. God has promised not one of us is going to die.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm glad you said that, because this pulls us into something I would like to take a look at. Again, if we look at what Luke says in verse 20, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. He doesn't say all of us, except for Paul, gave up all hope of being saved. Now, what's interesting is when you slip down to verse 23, last night, an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And so what do you think is going on here in this narrative where Paul is concerned? Paul, the state of Paul's heart, the state of Paul's faith.
So one thing he knows, even from prior, that God has him a special designated mission for him that no one can stop. Before kings and all kinds of things that's going to occur. And here he's reassuring him. The plan is the same. You're going to, not only am I going to deliver you, but everyone with you. So take heart in that.
Because he'd already communicated to Paul, you must stand trial before Caesar. When you get back into the Old Testament and you look at Joshua or you look at Deuteronomy, there is a wonderful question that God asks people when they're supposed to do something very difficult and they're scared. Have I not commanded you? In a way, God had commanded Paul to go to stand in front of Caesar because God had a lot of things he wanted to accomplish. If God had commanded them to do this, what did that mean on God's end of the thing? It's handled. It's already written. I'm already there.
Charlton Heston would say, so let it be written, so let it be done.
That was Yul Brynner, but that's okay. I won't quibble. I won't quibble names. Yes.
Paul was educated by that Sanhedrin, which is the biggest thing about laws. He knew what exactly is to obey.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he sat at the feet of Gamaliel, who's a pretty wise guy, turns out.
So now maybe the centurion was know what Paul was background for him to have a respect.
Yeah, I mean, you see the chain of provenance coming here. You've got, this one gentleman saying, this is Paul. I don't see that he's guilty, but I'm going to send him down to Festus, and then Festus, and then Felix, and then Felix, and Agrippa. So, it's just, I guess what I find interesting here is that Paul had already been told that he was going to appear before Caesar, but he's come through an experience that for any of us in this room, that would have taxed my little bucket full of faith. All right. I would have been thinking, I made a mistake. What did I do? This is wrong. And like this. And he's not just seeing things. He's wet. Okay. For 14 days, he's wearing seawater and maybe seasick. I don't know. But God then sent this angel to him to give him that strength. The same way he would send his angels to Jesus at his time, his most difficult times, after his 40 days in the wilderness. God sent some folks, if you will, to help him, to minister to him. When he's in his darkest moments, we know that God was constantly strengthening that human part of his nature that he had to deal with. And there's nothing wrong with being afraid, is there? Nothing wrong with feeling fear. Fear is native. I mean, we're given the ability to be afraid to preserve ourselves, correct? It's an instinctive thing. But if we feel fear in our lives as Christians, let me just ask you, have there been instances in your life as a Christian that you have been fearful? Not of robbers. I'm talking about fearful about life, what's going on in your walk with the Lord. Have you ever felt fear? Of course. Sometimes fear comes in, should I mention the name of the Lord to this guy? There's a little bit of fear there too, isn't there? And that's real. When you know in your gut that God has placed you on the you on the same course with this other person, this may be a person that you know to be irreverent. Okay? Do you ever feel fearful in bringing up the name of the Lord with certain people? I have. It's real too. I mean, dry mouth and the, what do I do? What do I do? And then what does the Lord tend to do for us in situations like that if we will let him? What does the Spirit do?
So maybe not as hard in here in this country, but if we go back to another country which you cannot speak, that's a very, very fear.
Yes. I mean, Would I be witnessing to the Lord, about the Lord in Sudan? I'm not sure about that. But I mean, just in within the zip code of 77505, you can come across situations in your life where there is some fear having to do with what we believe about this. It's just wonderful to see how the Lord is so very merciful with us. We read in, I think it's Psalm 103, that He remembers that we are dust. What does it mean in the context of what we're talking about tonight, that God remembers that we are dust?
Has patience with us.
He has patience with us. We are made to be weak, are we not? We are made with weaknesses. It's very common for us in our walk with the Lord to recognize at some point, hopefully, that the Lord has given us a talent. He's given us an ability. He's given us a calling. That has sort of a positive flow about it, right? But what does Paul say about weaknesses? What does Paul say about his weaknesses?
When I'm weak and I'm strong is one of the things, because he realizes that he has to rely on God, not himself, which is the same for us.
That is right.
And God told him, my strength is made perfect in weakness.
Exactly. And he says, so then I all the more will boast about my weaknesses. So God created us with abilities, talents, proclivities, but He also created us with weakness.
Which helps us to maintain a measure of humility.
A big measure of humility.
Get pride creep into our lives.
That's right.
Right here where you were speaking about, or reading it, when Paul tells him, last night, an angel of the God whose I am. He doesn't say my God. He says the God whose I am.
Yeah. I belong to Him.
Total submission. Yeah,
Yep.
total submission to like, okay, this is God. Because you said, Luke said, we all gave up hope. Now, I'm assuming he's been talking with Paul during this point. Paul may not have too positive an attitude. And then the angel appears and says, as you pointed out, do not be afraid. Why? Because Paul is afraid.
Yeah,
But then he calls him the God whose I am.
that's true.
I always like it when it's put that.
Yeah. Is it any coincidence that he would be in that frame of mind as being the possession of this God when he is?
Totally put himself right there, you know. You're carrying me now. It's up to you.
You bet.
It's out of my control. Now that I have experienced, okay?
Totally trusting the pen for truth. I'm depending on you, and I'm trusting you.
That's right. Now the Romans who are on this ship, they got tons of idols. I'm going to say there's a 100% chance that there were idols on this ship. Okay? Maybe even on their person. Some of these sailors. Because sailors are pretty superstitious. So, do you think that these people with the little god of whatever in my pocket, do I feel that I am the possession of this God, or is this my lucky rabbit's foot?
Oh, like a giant for them people. Man, he was a conqueror.
It's just, you think about the evangelistic input of what this means. Here's a man talking about his God as being the owner of him. That's important, I think. Anyway, we got just a couple minutes left. I just curious questions, comments about what we've read.
I'm trying to visualize that. So when God told Moses to take people out of Egypt, and then when he went to talk to God, and God told him, tell these people not to come too close because I will kill them.
That's right.
And now he's talking to Paul.
Yeah.
He sent an angel and said, Paul, don't worry about it, trust me. But if we go back to the Genesis when he says, Tell them not to come close. Tell them
Yeah.
to stay there.
Yeah, that's true. You talk about the Exodus, and
Yeah.
I'm glad we only have 2 minutes left because I could talk about this all night. But so the Israelites are making it toward what I believe is the Gulf of Aqaba, and they are surrounded, according to Josephus, they are surrounded by the Egyptian army on mountains that go all the way to the sea. And if they're crossing is where it probably is, the Nueva Beach. They're on this beach, and all they see is soldiers, according to Josephus, all the way down, touching both pieces of the surf, okay? They're completely enclosed, and they look over here, and they see 4 miles of the Gulf of Aqaba and a distant landmass way over there. They are as squished and as God said, I made this so that so you would see what I'm going to do. So he's already told him, I'm going to take you to this promised land. Okay? Have I not commanded you, go into the promised land? Follow me to do this. So Moses and the people are crying out. Moses is crying out, and God says, why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to move forward. It's like, what? Move forward? And so, yes, Charlton Heston, behold the mighty power of God. But the point is, God said, I have commanded you. I don't care if the Anakites are 12 feet tall. I don't care if you can't carry their grapes on a pole. If you look like grasshoppers, big deal. I'll squash them like grasshoppers. I'm commanding you to do this. I'm already there. Just follow me. And if we can absorb that sense of confidence in the God who owns us, wow. Can you imagine what we would do with that kind of faith?
Mountains.
Gosh. Peter was called, O ye of little faith, and his feet floated on water as he walked for at least a few steps, right? No other 100% human's ever done that, as far as I know. And Jesus still said, lovingly, O you of little faith. I tell you what, we're told that God can do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to believe that. Really,
You know, the amazing thing in his trials that he overcome.
Yeah.
He was, I forget how many days, how many nights he hit the sea. It was 2 and 3, wasn't it? That shipwreck.
On the false ship.
Yeah.
He said a day and a night in the open sea.
Yeah.
I think so.
That day walk without a life jacket, that'd be tough. But
Yeah. I guess my point is the God we serve is infinite, and the more we can consciously focus on his infiniteness, the stronger our faith is going to be. And God's going to be saying, just don't cry out to me. Cry out to me if you want, but don't stop. Just say, I'm here. I don't see any road, but because you say go that way, I'm going to do it. And God is faithful completely. So I hope that we can.
Peter said, Lord, to whom else shall we go?
You alone now the words of life.
Experience, man. They tried everything else, man.
Yeah. I tell you what, this Christian walk is an incredible journey, isn't it? Incredible. And our God's got no bounds in his capability. So, thank you, guys.